if each of you might want to comment on what you've just heard, we have a few minutes. So were there any ideas that popped up that you wanted to respond to or expand upon?
But I would just say, and this maybe is a little bit more hopeful, politics matters, leadership matters. I mean, at the end of the day, there are a lot of people around who have a lot of anxieties, a lot of hatreds, a lot of prejudices. There always have been. There probably always will be to some degree, no matter how much we try to educate them better and so forth. There'll always be losers in, the economic, whether it's democratic socialism or democratic capitalism. There'll be people who do less well in life, people who are unlucky, people who feel entitled and hate losing some privilege they might have fairly or unfairly from the past and so forth. A healthy political system tries to deal with a lot of these problems and grievances and anxieties, but also tries to make sure that they don't take over the system or any party or any part of government. An unhealthy system lets them take over and then sometimes tries to at least deal with them or manage them when they've taken over part of the government, and then that's not such an easy thing to do, and then it can get pretty bad, whether that's the American South in the late 19th century, or whether it's obviously Europe in the 1920s and 30s. So, but political leadership does matter. It's not as if we have no idea in the US what responsible leadership would look like. And obviously we would have our differences, I'm sure, about what exact form of it we would all like, but I think we could agree there have been responsible leaders in both parties, actually, and on liberal and conservative sides, who dealt with at least some of these issues, but they probably had blind spots as well. But those can be overcome by the next generation of leaders. So for me, thinking ahead, once we get past election day here, and maybe there's a little bit of a chance to breathe and to think harder about what can be done more structurally, more institutionally, but also just in terms of rhetorical leadership and making clear the price that we could end up paying for being so either irresponsible in what we do and what we endorse and what we tolerate, or at least negligent, even if we're not affirmatively doing anything terrible. Maybe it's an opportunity really for the next generation. We've had, one generation of leaders really since the end of the Cold War now, and maybe it's time for, and we'll have one more of that generation, and Joe Biden, if he wins, or Trump, actually, whoever wins will be in the 70s. But obviously there's going to be a big generational change coming. That can be good, that can be bad. A lot of young people are more immune to a lot of these temptations of authoritarianism than older people. I think in the US they may be now, but historically, maybe not, as Nadine suggested in some ways. And also historically, a lot of the worst movements were young people's movements, not necessarily old people. So we can't be complacent that, young people are going to save us. But having said that, I think there is an opportunity now to get, to have some real leadership that will deal with these problems, some of which go back decades, centuries, some of which are much more recent, some of which are technological, social media, some of which are particular to particular issues. So I'm not quite as pessimistic, I guess, is what I want to say, as maybe this whole discussion would lead one to think. But I will say that if we don't, but it's also very much worth having this discussion, because if not, we don't succeed, failure could be very ugly. I mean, I've been around for a while, and many people have, America may not step up, the 21st century may not be as good as the 20th century, but people's idea of failure has been sort of slow economic growth, or, sort of not being on the cutting edge of technology, perhaps, or not being able to do as much as we should be doing to help others around the world. Failure could be a lot uglier than we have tended to think. And so these stakes are very high, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Clearly one of the things that's been notable to me in my lifetime, when we're all about the same age, is just how much that pendulum can swing from one administration to the next, the mood of the country. Chad, thoughts that you have?
Yeah, quickly. I like quotes from some of my favorite people. And one of my favorite quotes is from James Baldwin. And this was an interview that he did with Kenneth Clark right after his famous meeting with Robert F. Kennedy. And Kenneth Clark asked him how he felt about the future of America. And James Baldwin said, I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. And I think that speaks so clearly and powerfully to not just how I feel, but I think how we need to think about this moment, again, in the long kind of span of African American history, which has been rooted in a type of hopefulness for America and for redeeming this country's democracy, right? Recognizing America for what it can potentially be, and fighting like hell to make that happen. I studied W.B. Du Bois, who lived 95 years, and he devoted his entire life to fighting for democracy, recognizing the flaws of America, using the whole range of his intellectual and artistic gifts to fight for freedom for Black people, but recognizing, even as he was on his deathbed in Ghana, that America still was a place of wonderful potential. So I think we need to be clear-eyed, absolutely, while at the same time recognizing that in order for this country to get out of the condition that it's in, it's going to take a commitment to struggle, to historical honesty, and continuing to be hopeful in a very kind of centered way.
I would just like to add to both of those comments that in addition to great leaders that Bill and Chad have mentioned, mass movements and mass protests has really been responsible for an enormous amount of positive change in this country. I'm not an official historian, but looking at the history of civil liberties and civil rights in this country, as I'm telling friends now who are despondent about what might happen to the Supreme Court, you know, for most of our history, it wasn't the Supreme Court that was issuing pro-civil liberties or pro-human rights or civil rights rulings. And a lot of the changes came about through grassroots struggles that ultimately manifested themselves in constitutional amendments and historic civil rights statutes. And so I think, to me, one of the really encouraging developments recently has, and Chad already alluded to it, protest movements that are so diverse in terms of who's participating, and that people are participating even despite anxieties about that are provoked by the pandemic. And obviously I support the right to peaceful assembly, not violence, but that is what most people are engaging in. And that's really important, not only to as an exercise of individual free speech, but really has been an engine for, I think, moving us closer and closer to our constitutional ideals, or the ideals in the Declaration of Independence.